This like 20 times now. Are you like deaf? I'm being very clear on this. Can you cite any part of the report where he claims that there was no chemical weapons attack?
Oh,
How you doing?
all right. Good. How are you?
Wonderfully. All right. No reason to continue with the pleasantries. Are you ready to get into it?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, there's a lot to get into. So, I guess I'll just start off by saying, for the audience who doesn't know me, I'm a relatively new streamer, political streamer. I've been doing this for about a year and a half. My name's Jackson, and I am not a journalist, but I've been following this story very closely. And I was frustrated by some of the things that you said on your stream regarding both the general findings of the OPCW investigators and my own views on the subject. So that's why we're here. We're going to talk about it.
I'm sure. All right, so a little bit of a preamble before we get into this. I suspect this is probably going to be a waste of time because I have a lot of experience debating Holocaust deniers. I know that generally speaking, when people form their opinions based on conspiracism, it's usually not because they actually have a vested interest in the facts. It's usually because they have like a set of biases that existed beforehand, and they'll engage in like selective reasoning to adopt any beliefs that they can use to post hoc justify those, pre-existing biases. I guess we'll see how much of a waste of time this will be. So I wasn't that familiar with the specifics on this incident until I guess last night because
You're doing some late night Wikipedia prepping, right?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with like every conspiracy theory out there. I also don't know much about like Alex Jones and like sometimes you gotta pack that stuff in. It's also like completely irrelevant to any person should care about. So, but I looked into it, and the information in favor of my side was so overwhelming and so compelling that by the end of this conversation, I legitimately believe that you're continuing to disagree with me. You attributed only to mental illness or willful dishonesty. I actually believe, like, at first I thought, like, oh god, this is going to be like a really confusing and granular issue where like it's going to be really tough to understand. But the more I looked into it, I realized this is such an unbelievably difficult issue to contest the general narrative on. That like, wow, But again, like I'm coming into this with a little bit of bias because I'm interacting with a lot of members of the broader like gray zone, Jimmy Dore community, and I have, let's say, like a negative opinion of them, But I don't know, maybe it'll change my mind. That's some pleasant interactions in the past, so I guess being adjusted. If you wanted to talk about the CW report, the chemical weapons attack on Juba, or alleged chemical weapons attack, and all of the implications and possibilities theretofore. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, we don't have to talk about anything besides that. Do you mind if I give some initial context, though? This isn't something my audience is that familiar with. I want to explain like the broader context if possible.
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So Bashar al-Assad is a brutal, tyrannical, far-right dictator, and he has, over the course of the Syrian civil war, engaged in many acts of barbarity against his own population, both political and military, which has led to the death of nearly 100,000 civilians attributed to him, the displacement of millions. There have been dozens of chemical weapons attacks that have been attributed to him and verified by a number of international organizations designed to engage in peacekeeping and verifying facts. So to fake all of like those chemical weapons attacks beforehand would be like to assemble the evidence in such a way as to form dozens of false flags that tricked so many wars internationally is like unfathomable. So there's a history of the use of chemical weapons by Assad's regime against civilian men.
Sorry, before you continue, it's just important to get the facts right. And by the way, I know you labeled me as an Assad defender on your screen title. I have no problem saying that Assad is a brutal dictator, and I do not defend him. What I'm here to do is defend the whistleblowers and the investigators who were sent on behalf of OPCW into Duma. What I will say is that you said a bunch of international groups and activist groups had confirmed all of these previous chemical weapons attacks. That's a pretty broad statement. This is actually the first time that the OPCW has ever been able to go on the ground in Syria and investigate a chemical weapons attack. And that's why this is so important. So all other previous chemical weapons attacks have usually had key evidence that was passed through these rebel groups, these Saudi-funded al-Qaeda rebel groups like Jaish al-Islam. And in addition to that, a lot of these previous attacks have been contested.
Right. So we're beginning already. So first of all, you can't really claim that you're not defending Assad when you're making the claim that numerous highly credentialed accusations against Assad with regards to him engaging in crimes against humanity are fake. Like I'd be saying, like, I'm not defending Hitler. I just think that Auschwitz-Birkenau was a POW camp, and the deaths there were the product of like allied bombing Ukraine mines, so you can move there. I mean, this isn't really what we're here to talk about. If you're one, I encourage like any audience member to take a look at human rights violations during the Syrian civil war. There are estimations on the use of chemical weapons that range from 30 to a conservative number that most people use. There were some reports that claim that it's in the hundreds. There have been many international organizations that directly observed the use of torture, unlawful killing, and bombing of hospitals, the indiscrimination in civilian areas, collective punishment, the slaughter of political dissidents, the deprivation of food and water, the destruction of key infrastructure. It goes
not a good time. So we agree.
Wait, hold on. So you can't. So wait, you can't say like.
I just want to make sure we're in agreement.
Yeah, Assad is a bad guy. It's just you were just saying like actually these things haven't been confirmed before, and they were all passed through Syrian rebel info, which isn't true.
Things that you just said. I said that a lot of the key chemical weapons attacks have been contested by very reputable sources. For example, one of the most notable that the U.S. had indicated was a major chemical weapons attack. The alleged chemical weapons attack in Ghouta was actually, it was contested by a number of individuals. It was contested by Seymour Hersh in the London Review of Books. And in addition to that, actually Barack Obama confirmed that these reports were false of an alleged chemical weapons attack when James Clapper told him that the evidence of the alleged Syrian chemical gas attack in Ghouta was not a slam dunk and they shouldn't act upon it.
So saying that evidence is not a slam dunk and should not be acted upon is not the same as repudiating the existence of those attacks to begin with. Additionally, this is one of the reasons why conspiracy is really difficult. Wait, please, hold on.
Well, actually, Assad, without a doubt, perpetrated all of these attacks.
No, I did not. Wait, I did not say that, actually. What I said is that there is hold on. What I actually said was that there is undeniable evidence which has been corroborated across many international peacekeeping organizations that the use of chemical weapons has taken place in Syria, the majority of which have been attributed to Assad. For many of these chemical weapons attacks, it is logistically impossible to determine who actually did it. We don't always have the ability to factually determine the exact circumstances that led to chlorine gas contamination in an area. However, a lot of these are very heavily, inferentially, attributable to Assad. I think about 95% of them typically.
I'll also add before we continue on here that a lot of these key organizations that you are citing, like Human Rights Watch, for example, I'd imagine is one of the ones that you'd cite for, claiming that there was rights attacks. They all differ in how they actually took place based on the evidence and the validity of it. So some of these groups allege that there were over 300 weapons attacks that took place. Some allege that there are only 30, and even in those 30, still huge problems with the amounts that the evidence that's supposed to suffice the claim that Assad was responsible. So I think we can both, argue our heads off on these previous chemical weapons attacks, but what we came here to talk about today was the OPCW colors.
Scandal is a pretty strong term. But anyway, I just think it's interesting that when pointing out the fact that there was a tremendous amount of evidence of previous chemical weapons usage by Assad in Syria, you instantly left with the next. Wait, hold on. It's always alleged because he denies all of it. But you instantly it's just
it's alleged.
It's interesting that you don't call yourself an Assad defender when your apparent defense of the regime extends beyond the one incident where we have whistleblowers for the OPCW, but extends broadly to the entire range of information we have on the subject. Again, this isn't what the debate is supposed to be about, and conspiracism is always like a rabbit hole because, again, I've argued with Holocaust deniers. Did you know there was one investigation with the Red Cross that found that there were no deaths at this camp back in 1933? That's seriously. You can go down it forever, but if you want, you can take a look at the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian civil war. I'll put it this way, okay? The use of chemical weapons has been so significant and so extensive and so well documented that to falsely attribute all these instances to Assad would require a greater false flag operation than literally any other effort in human history. I would believe that as readily as I would believe that the existence of Auschwitz Birkenau was faked by Jewish American journalists who were planted at the scene and photos of a summer camp and put iron rock fences around it to convince Westerners that the Holocaust happened. You can look at the evidence if you want, but again, you can only go into so much. So your claim, oh God, we haven't even gotten to what happened. Okay, so on April 7th in 2018, in the city of Duma, which is about 10 kilometers away from Damascus, there was a Syrian rebel occupation of the city. This occupation had taken place for about 6 years at that time. The city was under heavy shelling at the time from Assad's forces. And then the following things allegedly took place. Two Mi-8 helicopters, which are used by the Syrian Air Force, dropped chemical weapon payloads on a neighborhood in the city of Duma, releasing chlorine gas, which killed, yes, allegedly, which killed about 32 people, led to the displacement and injury of hundreds or more, which were then moved out to hospitals, what have you.
And even the key investigators who are on the ground in Duma, they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the helicopters that were claimed to have been seen did not drop any of the cylinders that were seen on the site.
So what you're saying is incorrect, but we haven't gotten to that yet, okay? We'll get to that in a moment. So anyway, here is the evidence, I suppose, on my side. So here's what would have needed to have taken place. Or wait, is your suggestion that this was a false flag? The chlorine bombs were thrown by the U.S. or Syrian rebel forces? Was your contention the same as the Russian and Syrian governments that there was no chlorine gas release?
There's no definitive, outline as to what actually took place yet because the investigation was stopped. The key fact-finding mission team members were forced out of the team, and they weren't able to complete their investigation. So if you read in the actual...
This is also not correct, but I'm asking you, was it a false flag or did it not happen?
Listen, Maj, you're the one who spent all last night on Wikipedia reading about this.
We haven't gotten to the actual facts of the case.
Let me finish my points. If you read the first draft report, you will find that they left open multiple different avenues or opportunities as to what could have actually taken place in Duma and what was responsible for the alleged attack. Okay.
So the argument by the Russian and Syrian governments was that there was no attack, that chlorine gas was never released in that area. Is that an opinion that you share, or do you believe that the Russian and Syrian governments are lying or otherwise working on complete information?
According to the investigators who are on the ground, there is the potential that there was a non-chemical related attack.
A non-chemical related attack, like bombs being dropped.
There were over 40 people who died, correct?
That is correct. So, bombs were dropped, or what kind of attack? The city was being shelled at the time. Are you saying that it was artillery fire?
I'm not. They weren't able to identify that. You can see very clearly, though, that people who were filmed at the scene had, foam protruding from their mouths. But they weren't able to identify that, and I'm not going to act like me being some YouTube streamer has any more information on this than what they provided. But they did leave open the avenue that if there was a non-chemical related attack, and they also said they weren't able to find any sort of outlying evidence that suggested that there was a chemical attack that wasn't sarin or chlorine.
So the term leaving open the avenue in this case means nothing. When it comes to investigations like this, especially ones that are done weeks after the actual attack, it's almost impossible to document anything. The most you can do is use evidence to eventually try to provide the most information, which of course the final report of the slide you want. Wait, please.
Hold on. You refute that. You made a claim, so I'm going to refute that.
Okay.
If you believe that there's no evidence to suggest any of this stuff, and considering it's all open avenues, then we're left in the dust, and who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what happened?
I didn't say.
Why don't you? Okay, restate what you just said. Then.
I said that when it comes to investigations on the ground, there are definitely after an alleged chemical weapons attack is very rarely possible to do anything. The statement leaves open the possibility or leaves or doesn't really mean much in this case because potentially they can do anything. That's language that's used in many such investigations.
It doesn't, because they had indicated that it was highly unlikely that chlorine was responsible for this attack. It was found in, there was like chlorinated.
I don't know the specific claims here. I promise you will make these statements later. But hold on.
So if you believe that
I just asked you if you think it was a false flag or not.
I already answered that question, Bosh.
Wait, no. So the problem is that people in your political camp are just saying, we have questions. There have been strong. Apparently, strong definitive claims made by the Syrian and Russian governments that there was no chemical weapons attack. You share their opinion that there was no chemical weapons attack.
There's no evidence of a chlorine gas attack. They left open the opportunity that there was a non-chemical related attack.
By Assad's forces, or
even insinuate who could have been responsible for the open avenue of a non-chemical related attack. The investigation was compromised by OPCW executives before that had taken place.
Okay, we'll get to that note for it. Okay, so your argument then is that there was no chemical weapons attack, but there may have been a conventional attack.
No, that's not what I just said.
Okay, would you mind repeating? Because I need you to commit to a position, because your position here is we have questions that I don't even have a position to attack, and I'll just list out all the evidence.
This is the third time I'm going to have to answer this question. The inspectors told us that there was no chlorine gas release that caused this attack, which that's what the evidence is. The first interim report.
The draft report, you mean the unreleased report that was not representative of the entire opinion of all those present, the one that was drafted by the, investigator B, the Alex Spiritman, the one that was later responded to with internal emails that were released by WikiLeaks 6 months afterwards that proved there was scientific reasons why they
We'll get to the entirety of Inspector B. I know you have questions about that, but let's save that for later because you're jumping around right now. So,
I'm not the one. I'm not trying to talk about any inspectors yet. I was just asking if you thought there was a false flag attack because I need to know which wrong approach and address.
For the fourth time, what I'm saying is there's no evidence that chlorine gas was released from the cylinders, which is what the U.S. alleged was responsible for this attack. Okay, so you got that right.
Not just the U.S. Also the OPCW, their report, the organization we're talking about, they allege that.
In the final report, but the OPCW investigators who actually were on the ground in Duma investigating this, they found no evidence that chlorine gas was released from the cylinders. Okay,
and from where do you know that exactly?
From the reports that they did.
Really? Because the person that you're referring to, this Alex, the one who wrote.
Okay, well, these three of the inspectors later, I know you want to jump around.
I'm not jumping around. You're making claims about these reports. I'm impressed.
I want to answer your question, but I want to answer your question because this is the fourth time I've had to repeat myself. So that's the first part of my answer. The second part of my answer is that they left open the avenue that there was a non-chemical related attack that took place. They didn't allege who was potentially responsible for that potential non-chemical related attack. And they also left open the potential for there to have been a chemical attack with a chemical that was not identified on the scene until we noted that that was highly unlikely.
So your argument, the reason why like you call people at U.S. State Department officials who want over Syria is because you have the incredibly bold position that there was a possibility that some other explanation may have been left open in an interim draft report that was later contested for internal documentation that was kept secret from the public for months and then released in full and responded to the final report. Your claim is that in an initial draft there was a possibility of there may be leaking other things. You don't have any stronger claims against that. No reason why there were canisters damaged consistent with the drop of those canisters, corpses were blown coming out of their mouths. We can talk about the approach to the metal or the hydrochloric acid or the hypochloric acid that was present in the location, which is consistent with moisture and hydrochloric gas. You have no other claims.
Cross up really quickly without actually going through each point. I can do the same. I can do the exact same thing. I won't give you another
asking you. Okay, so let's just go over that. Okay, so let's go over why we did these things.
There's one last thing I want to say. They continue to say that the inspectors, the original report, the original draft reports, as you cited, you try to insinuate that because it's a draft, it's not valid, even though it was peer reviewed by 4 other team members. And also, none of the points have been refuted by OPCW executives in that draft report. By OPCW executives, you think they've been refuted?
In internal email documentation, they responded to claims made in that draft document, and the final one included many passages which addressed concerns levied by the draft report referring to it. Yes.
Really? I would love to see that.
By the way, reviewed doesn't mean accepted. That's why it wasn't published.
No, it wasn't published because they omitted key information to sharply deviate from the findings of the initial inspectors who were on the ground in Duma.
By initial inspectors, are you referring to Alex? Because Alex never left his command post in Damascus. Why do you keep referring to all the people on the ground in Duma as the people who wrote that report? Alex wrote that report.
Alex wrote the report. There was a fact-finding mission team, though, that collected all of the information for that. And we will get to the integrity of the inspectors later if you want to, because I think that's worth discussing. Or we can discuss that right now if you like.
No, we haven't even gotten to like the. So when we're talking about conspiracies, I find that it's actually better before digging into the conspiratorial elements to actually talk about possible alternatives. Okay. So you don't seem to be willing to commit to the Syrian and Russian narrative on this particular issue, which is fine. I mean, you're not like employed by Syria or Russia that I know of. But we can talk about the likelihood of other possible explanations for what is listed. So, if it was a non-fluorine-based attack, why were there 32 or so corpses found with death markers representative of death by fluorine poisoning? The foaming of the valve is caused by the acids that form when fluorine gas comes in contact with moisture, like moisture in our throats. So that's how they died. I can't show these pictures of videos on screen. There are videos taken at the time after these buildings with death markers that are directly indicative of the causes of fluorine gas poisoning. Were they killed by shells and then somebody like break and bone in their mouth, or like enough to convincingly like prevent crisis teams, or how would that have happened?
So, you just alleged that the symptoms of the victims were indicative of a chlorine attack. Is that what you're saying?
For the corpses, the fact that they were foaming in the mouth, that is absolutely consistent with the symptoms of chlorine death, and not like trauma or like shelling. Yes. No, being shelled will not cause that.
So that would be consistent with a mass chlorine attack, like what we've seen happen in previous world wars, where you have huge clouds of chlorine that are consuming regions of war for hours on end. It's not indicative of what took place here. According to the toxicologists who are on the ground in Duma and who met with some of the leading international experts on toxicology, one of which was from a NATO state, they found that with respect to consistency of the observed and reported symptoms of the alleged victims with possible exposure to chlorine gas or similar, the experts were conclusive in their statements that there was no correlation between symptoms and chlorine exposure. In particular, they stated that the onset of excessive frothing as a result of pulmonary edema observed in photos and reported by witnesses would not occur in the short time period between reported occurrence of the alleged incident and the time the videos were recorded.
Which is interesting because it was later indicated in the criticism report that came from my side of the aisle, people who knew that this actually took place, that no, those conditions can actually take place in as little as 30 minutes, depending on the concentration of the gas. Now, conveniently for my area, these bombs were dropped in closed areas. These weren't dropped into the street, they were dropped into a room or a bedroom, meaning that the chlorine gas exposure was not highly concentrated area. There was also this testimony of a green cloud shortly after the drop of these chemicals. Now, highly dispersed chlorine gas wouldn't produce visual effects like that, but highly concentrated chlorine gas would. There are witness testimonies of people dropping dead within seconds of the drop of the bomb. This is consistent with a highly pressurized and highly contained release of chlorine gas.
What those verses are those the white helmets?
No, those are not the white helmets.
Who are they? Who are those sources?
If you'd like, you can give me a moment. I can look up the specifics of the witness testimony.
Okay. Also, I think it's important to point out that the toxicologists who were reporting on this, they did rule out chlorine gas, as I just said. Do you have to know more than the international toxicologists who are reporting on this?
This is another interesting element of conspiracism that I like. Your claim is that the OPCW reports are flawed. That's the entire claim you're making here. My claim is that the toxicologists were correct. You're making the inaccurate assumption that the only ways in which the OPCW could possibly be incorrect are against the narrative of the Syrian government. I disagree. I think that in this instance, I think that the reports of the toxicologists only. Hold on.
No, you just said that I said something.
But I'm sorry, are you not alleging that the OPCW final report is inaccurate?
I'm alleging that the final report omitted key information that the toxicologists, engineering, ballistic experts, and the fact-finding team mission team members, found on the ground. And by omitting that information, they sharply deviated from the findings of the initial investigators who were on the ground and used it to paint an outcome that insinuated that a chlorine gas was responsible. When the toxicologist, as I just read you, said that it was not possible.
So, yes, you do believe that the OPCW report was inaccurate. I believe that there are inaccuracies also. So hold on again. Hold on. This is the selective credibility that I'm testing right now. Essentially, when the information lines up in a way that's convenient to your narrative, you can explain it away with internal bias, meddling, corruption, or censorship. But when I said, I know you're upset, but I need you to hold on. Take it one thing. So you keep saying international experts. So were all of the people who found that there was a chlorine weapons attack. The OPCW was not the only organization on the ground up doing it, by the way, nor the other locations for weapons attacks in Syria. You keep referring to international experts, but the international experts have already agreed this was a chemical weapons attack. If you're going to defer towards international expertise, the world already agrees with me. So you're not going to have to rely on that. All right. Let's just take this a second at a time, okay?
Watch. U.S., UK, and France all pointed to the OPCW to lead the investigation into this, and the investigation omitted key information that was not
you keep repeating this. We haven't even gotten to that yet, and what you're saying is also inaccurate. Okay. If you remember, the question that I initially asked you was, how did all of these corpses with bone in their mouths show up with deaths that are consistent with the effects of chlorine gas exposure?
They're not. I just read to you that he reported this is according to the toxicologist that he observed and reported symptoms of the alleged victims with possible exposure to chlorine gas or similar. The experts were conclusive in their statements that there was no correlation between the symptoms and chlorine exposure. So I don't know why you keep alleging that they were consistent with chlorine exposure when the world's leading toxicologists have said that they are not.
So what else happened to them?
They didn't identify it because they were forced off of the fact that
this is not correct. So let's break down some possibilities. So there's a claim then that the ultimate source of death might have been the product, like something else might have killed them. Let there be foam on their mouths and to demonstrate all of the symptoms of pulmonary edema. Keep in mind that the testimony of the toxicologists was not that these deaths' symptoms were inconsistent with chlorine gas, only that the symptoms demonstrated rapidly compared to what is expected with heavy exposure to chlorine gas. So the symptoms are consistent, only not within the time scale that toxicologists define. This has been tested by other people since. For example, Professor, we need to. I need to finish the claim. You can address the claim when it's done. Okay.
Just made a statement. I'm gonna refute that. So you said, due to time frame, I'm gonna repeat the toxicologist, findings one more time for you here. They said, I'm not cherry picking here. They said that the experts were conclusive in their statements that there was no correlation between symptoms and chlorine exposure. Okay, that's the sentence.
Okay, so we're familiar with the minutes of this meeting. We've already heard you. Thank you. So the reason why, if you've actually read the document, I have it in front of me, by the way. If you actually read the document, okay, you will find the reason why they did so was because the onset of the pulmonary edema was done too rapidly. Okay, it's not because the blocking of the mouth wasn't consistent with the effects of chlorine gas exposure. Additionally, here's another quote from the article by my these experts were also of the opinion that it was highly unlikely that victims would have gathered in piles at the center of the respective apartments and controlled this.
Potentially identify what was responsible for this had the investigation not been compromised. And also,
okay, so your argument is no other explanation.
Just like 5 different things. So let me continue. You said that this was a poorly ventilated building. That there was a massive gaping hole on the top of the roof. There was open windows, and there was multiple avenues for people to leave the building and go out into the open, where they would have been able to have fresh air. The toxicologist pointed out that it didn't make sense.
The city was under siege.
In the short time period between the reported occurrence of the alleged incident and the time that the videos were reported, that they would have had that onset of excessive coughing or pulmonary edema.
Jackson, the city was under siege. You were in an apartment building, huddled for your life, and you hear please hold on, and you hear your roof get blown out. Is your response to run out into the street?
A hole in the room too.
It wasn't a one-story building. There were people in the lower floors of the building. All they heard was the roof get blown out. chlorine gas is heavier than air. It sank to the lower levels, which were most of the forces were found.
It was not a highly contained building. There were open windows. There was very clear avenues for people to leave the building, such as doors. And there was a gaping hole in the top of the building, which is where the cylinder was found. Okay, so
chlorine gas stinks. So wait, I get this sometimes when I argue with like wannabe Jackie Chans who think they can pump through their way out of like salt. If you're in Syria and your city has been under shelling from the government for a long time now, you hear your roof get blown out, people are screaming, dust is billowing down, and all of a sudden people start choking. Is it dust? Is it gas? You don't know, but you do know you're not supposed to go outside during a bunch of shelling. Now, normally when it comes to chlorine gas attacks, you head to higher ground, but the gas was coming to the higher ground. This was a worst case scenario for the people in the lower levels of that building. That's where the corpses were found.
No evidence that chlorine was released from those cylinders, though. So
wait, that's another claim that you're making. Wait, please, you're jumping to another claim. My claim is that my story is consistent with an explanation as to why these people would have experienced the effects of pulmonary edema quickly, because they were in a contained environment and because they died in an area where there would have been minimal ventilation, because chlorine gas travels downwards. It's heavier than air. The claim that no chlorine gas has been found is a separate claim that we'll address shortly.
All right, I'll let you finish. Is that all?
Yeah.
For that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do these corpses get fallen in house?
So you continue to say that this was a contained environment. It wasn't. There were open windows.
By the standards of chlorine gas, this is a contained environment.
I just let you talk, and granted, I've let you talk a lot in this stream so far, so please let me just talk. There was open windows. There was a gaping hole in the roof. There was doors that they could have exited. And again, the toxicologist pointed out the fact that it would not make any sense, first of all, that there was a correlation between the symptoms and chlorine exposure. In addition to that, they said that the onset of excessive throbbing as a result of pulmonary edema observed in photos would not occur in a short period of time reported occurrence. So unless you can,
did the toxicologist know the environment?
Unless you can concoct a situation in which these victims were just running around in the building and somehow the windows were, there's no evidence that the windows
chlorine gas sinks. Wait, okay, so keep in mind, the windows being open is not sufficient ventilation to survive chlorine gas attack.
Chlorine gas exited those cylinders.
Okay, so hold on, that's a separate claim. So if chlorine gas was released from those cylinders, the concentration of that gas at the lower levels of that building would have been sufficient to produce the effects of pulmonary edema extremely quickly. Do you know for a fact that these toxicologists were familiar with the limited environment in which this gas was exposed? Probably not, because they specifically say in these minutes that they found a highly unlikely behavior that they then died engaging in. So it seems like the only thing the toxicologists knew were a couple of biomedical pieces of information on the corpses, not the broader context in which they were killed. Additionally, if you want to Google it, evidence exists of pulmonary edema taking place near instantly in severe concentrations of chlorine gas. Since chlorine gas was concentrated in the building, assuming that please. Assuming that it was released at all, considering that it was contained within the building and that it's heavier than air and the death took place at the lower level, this is a very strong indication that if chlorine gas was released, it would have been able to be released in amounts significant enough to cause pulmonary edema. In short, these toxicologists were working off limited information, which is why this isn't a report. These are minutes from a preliminary meeting.
For the frothing to develop, they would have had to have been there for a prolonged period of time.
Incorrect.
On the concentration of chlorine, the sources that you're citing referring to instantaneous deaths from chlorine exposure are in world wars where you have massive clouds of chlorine consuming open war fields and sinking into trenches.
Wait, aren't trenches open air? They have open roofs and trenches.
We had open roofs, open windows, and 2 cylinders.
They have open windows and trenches, dog. There's not even a roof on those. And they still got pulmonary edema in seconds. That's crazy.
Chlorine. If you can prove to me how the inspectors, if you can prove to me that chlorine came from those cylinders, this would be a different.
We haven't gotten to that claim yet. The claim you're making right now is that if chlorine was, for instance, wait, please, we can't. Normally, when I talk with guys like you, they start to realize they're out of their depth and they don't stop talking because they know every additional point is another nail in their grave. We need to get we're like 1/20th of the way through this. I did way too much reading on this to let you get away with only being owned on a 10 days that I read up on. Okay?
You read Wikipedia, Bellingcat, and relied on Patrick Hillsman in your DMs.
You should have a very easy time. By the way, another thing Holocaust deniers like to say, oh yeah, you got your information from the ADL and from ex-Goldberg historian? Okay, why don't we take a look at the evidence available rather than just assuming that it's unvalid based on the preconceived biases you have about that agency? If I wanted to, I could just scream that you're an RT agent. I'm trying to actually help you fix it. Let's get to this point.
You're wrong that pulmonary edema would develop quickly based on the circumstances.
So again, this is the final thing that I'll say. Assuming chlorine gas was released, and we'll get to that, the evidence available is consistent with the development of pulmonary edema quickly because the toxicology minutes report, again, not a report, it was just minutes like that were cataloged. This wasn't like a formalized report that was verified. These are literally just minutes from a meeting from people who didn't have a full understanding of the info, as made evident by the minutes where they indicated they couldn't believe people would engage in behavior their corpses were found engaging in. They claim that pulmonary edema couldn't be sent in that quickly, but the evidence shows that there's actually plenty of circumstantial, surrounding conditions which may have led to it developing much faster than 2 to 4 hours, possibly within 30 minutes. So with all that said, we get back to the original question, how did corpses with foaming mouths get there?
I would love to get back to that original question, but your premise,
you didn't even answer it.
Your premise that there would be a rapid onset of pulmonary edema is completely reliant upon the concentration of chlorine.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. But we were only talking about the potential for pulmonary edema being evident in cases like this. Obviously, we'll talk about the likelihood of chlorine being released later. We have to get to this point right now. We're only on this point because you couldn't answer the question, why are corpses prone?
I literally just did answer the question, I think 4 or 5 times. I gave you my answer.
Chat, did you answer why there are corpses with bones? I don't remember that.
I said exactly what the inspectors on the ground found.
How did they get there? I don't want what the inspectors found. It's the evidence side with me. I want your alternative explanation for what took place.
And no one's alleged to have that because I'm not an inspector, and the inspectors who were investigating that, their fact-finding mission investigation was compromised before they could have alleged what was responsible.
Okay, so it didn't happen, but there's just don't look at any of the corpses with the foaming mouths, guys. It didn't happen, just don't look at them. Okay. All right, we can move to the next one. Okay, that's fine. So, okay. No, it's fine. We're just beginning. We have to move fast into this. Okay. So, with that being said, what about the numerous witness reports of the helicopter? The Syrian government was the only agency that had any control of the airspace over Duma. The Syrian rebel forces and I haven't found any evidence that they had a functioning air force in that region. So, what about all the witnesses who spoke not only to the OPCW claiming this, but also to journalistic organizations that showed up before the OPCW?
What? Regarding what?
The existence of the helicopter, the 2 helicopters that flew in the air over Duma, the 2 helicopters that were found to have deported to their air base just 15 minutes before they arrived at that location in Duma. And the fact, we could also throw in the fact that the damage done were consistent with damage done by very heavy cylinders being dropped from a couple of meters.
So, a few things on that. First of all, the OPCW investigators found tons of inconsistencies in the testimonies of the people on scene who you allege to be witnesses of these helicopters, these 2 Russian helicopters. But what I will say is it's possible that there were... Listen, please listen, just let me finish. There is a possibility that there were helicopters. I don't know their flight routes and that given day. But what I will say is that it is highly unlikely that you had two helicopters flying that close to the ground in an area that was controlled by Jaish al-Islam, which is a Saudi-backed extremist militia group that has advanced artillery access and could easily shot those two helicopters out of the sky. It makes no sense that they would have done that, especially considering that they were
Syrian army frequently bombs rebel cities. They do that all the time.
They were just on the verge of regaining control of Duma. Jaish al-Islam had already began to release a few of the prisoners earlier that week on Wednesday. So it would make no sense for them to have done that.
Wait, helicopter bombings? First of all, they were currently shelling the city. And second of all, helicopter bombings in the Syrian Air Force take place constantly. That's a that's not just like this happened here because it's happened a few other times. This is like an ongoing reality of the Syrian civil war.
It's possible that there were helicopters, sure, but Ian Henderson's reports
on
the ground found that there was no evidence that suggested, and that it was improbable that helicopters actually dropped these cylinders in Duma.
Oh, we'll get to Ian Henderson. Don't you worry, buddy. So I just think it's interesting that like one of the claims you made to discredit the helicopter one was like, and why would they even drop bombs from helicopters anyway? When it's something they've been doing like all the time for years, like just like a reflexive defense on your part. We'll get to the Ian Henderson report. Don't worry. So your argument then is that there was
so this area. You're trying to regain control of this area, and then on this day, where they knew they were on the verge of regaining control, Jaish al-Islam had already indicated that they were about to negotiate a controlled release into Idlib province. Why would they continue bombing? It makes no sense.
They were shelling the city at the time. Wait, are you saying that Assad wasn't shelling the city at the time?
They were cylinders, that they were chemical cylinders.
Wait, one claim at a time. Are you saying Assad wasn't shelling Duma at the time? You're saying, like, why would they helicopter bomb Duma? They were currently shelling the city at the time. Like, the alleged chemical weapons attack took place during the shelling.
Chemical cylinders. That's what you allege.
Wait, you need to answer one point at a time. I'm not letting. Run away from that. Why are you saying that Assad wouldn't have reason to bomb the city when they were currently shelling the city?
They had a long history of shelling the city in an effort to regain control. But what you allege is far different. You allege that the helicopters dropped those chemical, alleged chemical cylinders.
Wait, hold on. You're mixing up claims again. You're getting confused. So I'm contesting the defense that you made. You claim.
Is that how you allege?
You claim very stupidly that you're saying, wait. We can't. You can't. Wait. Please don't turn into like hypocrite levels of brain dead yet. Please, God, give me a second, okay? You claim
on the cylinders, right?
Oh no, it's already happening.
Oh, is that what you allege?
So you claim that Assad would have no reason to bomb Duma when they were currently shelling Duma.
So I said they would have no reason to bomb with chemical cylinders.
You didn't say that actually. You just said they would have no reason to send helicopters on a bomb.
They have no reason to bomb with chemical cylinders, which is what you allege.
Wait, no, you didn't actually say that. You said they would have no reason to send helicopters on a bombing run. You said they did have reason to send helicopters on a bombing run. They did have reason to do that.
No, they have no reason to bomb chemical
We're not
cylinders.
talking about chemical cylinders yet. We're talking about the helicopters. Okay, hold on. So you're saying then that they did have a reason to send helicopters on bombing runs, not chemical bombing runs, but a bombing run, because they were already shelling the city.
The Syrian government had a long history of shelling Duma in an effort to regain control. But what you are alleging is that chemical cylinders were dropped.
So again, we're not talking chemical cylinders yet. We're just talking about the act of bombing with a helicopter, which you said they didn't have a reason to. So again, for like the fifth time, you believe then that Assad did have a reason to bomb with helicopters, considering he was currently shelling the city, just not with chemical weapons. You believe he had a reason to use helicopters to bomb the city. Not with chemical weapons, but just with conventional armor?
Not necessarily, but the allegation is that those helicopters drop chemical cylinders.
I know that. We take it one plane at a time instead of you trying to run from this one by jumping to this one. Why would they not have a reason to run helicopter sorties over Yuma when they were shelling the city?
Chemical cylinders into the buildings.
I know. The principal plane we're on right now is whether or not they would even have a reason to bomb the city. So they were already shelling the city. So did they have a reason to bomb it as well? This is yes or no.
Long history of shelling the city. Yes,
they were currently shelling the city.
A long history.
They were currently. Wait, are you shorting out right now? They were currently on that day, April 7th, 2018, bombing the city, shelling the city, and you said they would have no reason to run a helicopter sortie. We're running to other points here.
Helicopters were dropped from those helicopters.
Oh my! Are you broken?
That's your claim. That is your claim. Are you broken?
You need to answer this one, and then we can move to the chemical weapons. Do you believe the Assad government would have had a reason to run a helicopter sortie over that city? You said they did, but they were shelling the city at the time.
Not necessarily, but
why not? Wait, why not? Answer that. Why not necessarily? Why would they not be willing to bomb the city when they were currently shelling it and have bombed it many times before?
Because they were on the verge of regaining control. Not necessarily they could have. I don't know. That's not what the investigators were looking at.
Why did you make that claim? Then why are they shelling the city? But they already were on the brink of winning.
Your claim that we are here to debate is whether or not those helicopters.
Oh my God! You can't make spurious claims and then get mad when I call you out on them. If you made the claim, you should be able to defend it. You made the claim that there's no reason for them to run a helicopter to bomb the city.
Okay, so let's talk about the chemical cylinders.
Okay, so you're acknowledging that the Assad did have justification or like a reason to send helicopters to bomb Duma because he was already shelling it and he bombed it many times before. There's no reason to contest that.
Not necessarily.
Then can you justify that claim? Well, are you just saying it to like reflexively defend Assad? Are you like between his legs right now? Like, why are you making claims and then refusing to defend them?
Because it could have been. I don't know. That's not the investigation, and I'm not going to allege to know this.
Well, so you'll make claims, and then when called out, then you'll be like, well, I don't know.
No. Let me finish. It's possible. I don't know. I'm not going to act like I purport to know this. But what I will say is that Syria was on the verge of regaining control of this area, which had been under control of a Saudi-backed extremist militia group that was torturing civilians in Duma.
This has literally nothing to do. This is just a propaganda run. This has nothing to do with the claims being made right now. Like literally nothing.
Do it because I'm getting to the key point here. The fact that they had pretty much, there were people within Jihad al-Islam who had indicated that they were ready to negotiate an exit from Duma into Idlib. And they had already released some of the hostages on Wednesday.
So they were having to do with the claims of the helicopter.
Because why would they continue? Again, it's very possible that they did continue shelling. That's why I say not necessarily. I don't know. But why would they continue shelling if they were on the verge of regaining control?
They were continuing to shell. It's not why were they? Dude, if you want to know why, ask Assad. They were shelling the city. That's not a contested statement. The Syrian government doesn't deny it. They were shelling.
It has nothing to do with your principal claim, though. Your principal claim is that these helicopters dropped chemical weapons.
Then why did you bring it up? You were the one who said that Assad would have no reason to be shelling and bombing the city when they were currently shelling and bombing the city. What? You brought that up here. My question was, why were there witness reports saying there were helicopters there?
Let's talk about your allegation that the helicopters dropped these chemicals.
We weren't, so, okay, I get it. You want to work on this point. That's fine. So wait, the actual question was, why were there so many witnesses who said that there were helicopters at the time that the alleged chemical weapons attack took place? Like, right over that area that they bombed with those helicopters.
Investigate that. And you can't purport to know that either.
Wait,
when you do
wait, hold on. Wait, are you suggesting they were paid off?
What?
Why did all of those dozens of witnesses confirm they saw helicopters drop those bombs on locations 3 and 4?
I didn't say that they were paid off. I said that the CW investigators who were on the ground found inconsistencies with the witnesses all
their
around.
witness testimonies, of course they're going to find inconsistencies, but the overwhelming majority of people at that area confirmed that they saw helicopters drop those bombs. It's a war situation, of course there are going to be some inconsistencies.
Ballistic and engineering experts were on the ground investigating this. They said that there was no evidence to suffice that the helicopters definitively dropped those alleged nuclear cylinders into the buildings, and that's your principal claim.
Are you referring to Ian Henderson right now?
Yes.
Ian Henderson was never there.
That is a false claim.
Wait, hold on. Wait, am I mixing up? Wait, hold on. 1 second. Where's that report in the OPCW? I mixed him up with Alex. Hold on. Wait, hold on. With respect to Investigator A, Inspector A, sorry, he was not a member. Wait, hold on. Well, I think I just got Inspector A and B mixed up.
What? He was literally taking measurements in the building.
No, he didn't. Wait, no, he didn't. He worked off a drawing that he did off of the actual OPCW reports. Remember? The reason why his findings were rejected was because his measurements were inaccurate. His measurements of the cylinders were nearly 0.08 meters off because he was using a drawing, and they weren't let into the buildings. Hold on. This is the official claim from the OPCW.
That's not the official claim from the OPCW.
I read it.
That's a claim for Bellingham. The meters off. That's a claim for Bellingham.
It's corresponded from internal email documentation. I know you haven't read it because it doesn't support the narrative.
Image matching software to make that claim. Ian Henderson was on the ground taking measurements.
Wait, can I read it? Can I read the report?
Oi, boa noite. Está tudo. Tá, já deu pouco.
Really quick. Wait, can I read the report? Yeah, I said it because I briefly mixed up Inspector A and Inspector B. It's hard to keep up with those conspiracy stuff. I correct myself like 2 seconds afterwards. I know you're gloating because this is the closest you're getting to a W in this conversation, but let's take a deep breath and read this report, okay? So this is from the OPCW on independent investigation into possible breaches of confidentiality reports, okay? And they said, with respect to Inspector A, that's the Ian Harris report. Huh? Go on. Wait, what'd you say? Go on. Now, come on. Don't be a coward. What'd you say? Come on, share with us.
I was just talking with you. I was like, is this the doctor's report? But go on.
Okay, gotcha. Very nice. Is this from a Goldstein? Very, very common joke I'm familiar with from your kind. Anyway, with respect to Inspector A, he was not a member of the fact-finding mission. As described by... Wait, hold on. As described by the investigators, Inspector A played a minor supporting role in the investigation of the Newman incident, and he did not have access to all the information gathered by the MFM team, including witness interviews, laboratory results, and analyses by independent experts. Although Inspector A... Wait, hold on, please. Although Inspector A's assessment purports to be an official OPCW FFM report of the Newman incident, it was instead a personal document created with incomplete info without authorization. So to be clear, when you're saying that an on-the-ground team found inconsistencies and evidence of a helicopter dropping a bomb, what you're actually saying is that one guy who wasn't a part of the fact-finding mission produced an unauthorized and incomplete report that he didn't have access to the broader information available to the FFM. Not a broad team, just Inspector A.
So I was prepared that you might make these claims. These are the claims that have been leveled by OPCW Director General Fernando Arias, but they are completely false, and I have images of the OPCW documents that can prove you wrong. But first, I just want to briefly summarize.
Wait, on what?
That you allege that he wasn't a part of the fact-finding mission team.
They allege
so OPCW documents describe Henry, and I'm just briefly summarizing here, but I have all the links if you want me to send them to you.
I do.
OPCW documents describe Henderson as an FFN member, fact-finding mission team member, enlist him among the mission personnel, and add the group of inspectors, and in the group of inspectors on the Duma mission. They also list Henderson in the group of inspectors on the Duma mission, that he was a part of the team conducting the technical secretariat visits. And the Office of the Director General also noted, and I have pictures for all of this, that it would be happy if the visits to the cylinders in the hospital are led by Ian Henderson. So this is a debunked claim that was espoused by the OPCW Director General. Yes, I will. But these claims were espoused by him, and they've been debunked. And this is the same guy that the inspectors are alleging with the key information in this investigation, and I'm now going to send you this.
So if he was part of the FFM, then why did he have to produce a personal document with incomplete information and no authorization? The document that he released wasn't one of the drafts.
Sorry, I'm just trying to send you these, so give me 1 second.
Wait, no, hold on. Please don't send me grainy screenshots that look like they could have been from like a World War I training manual. Please give me the actual documents that these are from. Yeah, this is some cotton ADP type stuff right here. I'm going to need the actual documents these are from. And while you're posting these, we use the broader question, which is why so many witnesses claim that helicopters were present at the scene. Okay, I have responded to WikiLeaks. Wait, do you have like citations in here, or did you literally just find the papers? Wait, hold on. This is a first draft interim report. You're just sending like random shit. Didn't the first draft interim report come out before Ian Henderson published his undocumented report? Wait, what was the timeline on this? Are you just sending random shit?
My apologies. I didn't mean to send that last one.
Okay.
But the other ones Wait, and there's one more, because I actually said the wrong one.
Are you sure you're not just link dumping everything on WikiLeaks to me?
No, I was actually very prepared, so I had the leaked documents ready for you.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
Here, 1 second.
Yeah, the engineering assessment was published by, Henderson's engineering report. It wasn't like, it was a personal document. It was published in early 2019, whereas the draft of the CW report.
That's saying that it's a personal report is incorrect, but we'll get to that in a second because I'm trying.
Auténtico corazón de Valles, acompañado de una dulce miel de naranja que un amigo de Students prepara especialmente para nosotros. Calderé.
Listen to the last thing here.
Wait, what official supervision did that report undergo?
Again, we'll get to that in a second, but let me please just finish.
Okay, I'll look at these, but you still need to explain to me why so many witnesses saw helicopters at the scene dropping those bombs. Like, no. Witnesses do not claim to have seen them dropping the chemical cylinders. No, they claim that helicopters were present over the site at the exact instant people started dying. Okay, you put the pieces together in one. Why did they see helicopters there?
You're moving back on your claims because you know that was an incorrect statement. No one claims to have seen them dropping those cylinders. And in addition to that, the inspector, Ian Henderson, who I just pointed out here,
so wait, can you answer the question? Did they hallucinate the helicopters, or did helicopters from the Syrian government just happen to be directly overhead right as the false flag happened?
I'm not going to purport to know that the investigators didn't look into that, but what I will say is that the witnesses don't claim that they dropped the cylinders, and Ian Henderson was a part of the fact-finding mission team.
The witnesses were in buildings. They couldn't look up, but they heard helicopter planes, and they saw helicopters they left.
But you just tried to discredit the guy who did the reports that found that there was no evidence that those were dropped from a helicopter.
But we're not talking about the cylinders yet. We're talking about witness testimony.
What have I been imagining?
Wait, this the reason why this conversation feels like it's really discontinuous is because every time you can't answer a question, you go to the next one and you do have links to the report.
So just back it up with the actual leaked documents.
Wait, hold on. Do these leaked documents explain why dozens of witnesses claimed there were helicopters present at the attack?
You're the one who's jumping from arguing. Are you gonna retract the claim that Ian Anderson was not a part of the fact-finding mission?
Wait, one point at a time. You realize that was the original point we were making, right? I haven't even gotten to any of the whistleblower bits yet. You keep wanting to jump to them because that's where like the conspiracy buffers are.
Before me.
You answer the question. Why did witnesses all overwhelmingly the vast majority of people interviewed say that helicopters were present at the scene?
Watch. Again, there were a lot of inconsistencies with the witness testimonies. They don't allege that the helicopters dropped the cylinders, and Ian Henderson, who is the investigator, claimed that there is not evidence to suffice the allegation that the helicopters dropped the cylinders. So you need to wait. We need to break the loop. Can we break the NBC dialogue frame? Why? Are you saying it's a hallucination? We had already broken this loop, and then you made the claim that Ian Henderson was not a part of the fact-finding mission.
You were the one who brought up Ian Henderson.
I gave you the documents, and then you went back to the argument that you're trying to say.
Find me the passages in these documents that say what you say they say. You just provided me links to WikiLeaks articles.
So pull them up and read them. They're highlighted.
Wait, okay. So I would love to, but it takes me time to do that. So wait, there's an echo on your end. Why is there an echo? What happened?
I would not tell you that. There's an echo.
Hello? Yeah, there's an echo coming from your end. Do you have earbuds in?
Did it just start?
It just started like a minute ago.
Everyone on mine saying no echo, so I think it's something on.
No, it means that is your audio being broadcast audibly? Like, is it being picked up on your speakers?
Yeah, but I mean, I haven't changed anything. It has been for this entire time.
It might have something to do with auto sensitivity detection. Okay, so we can move to this, but I have to ask you again. Do you think there were helicopters, like, why did all these witnesses claim there were helicopters? Was it a coincidence that Syrian Air Force helicopters were just hovering over the area right as this alleged attack took place?
I don't know, Bosch, and the investigators did not look into that, but what they did look into was whether or not helicopters could have dropped those cylinders.
We'll get to that. Like, by investigators, you mean one guy who was discredited by the rest of the organization and published a personal report that was never filed officially. Don't use investigators plural.
Bosch, you just said he was discredited by the investigation. Your allegations for that was that he was not a part of the fact-finding mission team. I proved that wrong.
No, they said his reports weren't included in the final report.
They'd be happy if the visits to the cylinders in the hospital were led by Ian Anderson. In addition to that, I just want to point out that Ian Anderson is a chemical and engineering ballistics expert.
I know that he is an expert.
And in addition to that, he took measurements on scene, which you claimed he didn't. He served with the OPCW for a total of 11 years so far, and in 2005, a senior OPCW official wrote that Henderson has consistently received the highest rating of
nothing to do. This has literally nothing to do with the claims. So I'm going to find this.
Discredited.
Yeah. So wait, being discredited in one report doesn't mean that like your entire career has to be a legacy of failure. This has nothing to do. Just like, wait, why do I hear the echo again? Wait. Why do I hear the echo again? Can you like put earbuds in or something?
That's your problem, dude. It's not on mine.
Is this how limited your knowledge of how the world works is? It is my problem because I'm hearing my echo.
It seems like every single time I bring up the fact that your claim
you think I'm making it up?
Not being in a fact-finding mission, there's somehow an echo, but we'll try to figure this out.
Put earbuds in. Do you have earbuds? You can turn my volume down.
Not for my PC. Everyone on mine says no echo.
They can't wait. Do you know how echoes work? You can't hear echo because I have earbuds in.
Okay. No echo on my end, brother.
You don't. Are you trolling? You would be, wouldn't you? That's your out to this conversation, isn't it?
What?
This is your way out, isn't it?
John, this is your way out. What are you talking about?
You can listen to my stream if you want. There's an audible echo. It's very distracting. Everyone on my end can hear it. How many people are watching on my end? Okay, I have 7,500 people who can attest to the existence of an echo.
Okay, let's figure this out.
Okay.
We've been streaming this entire time, and we haven't had an echo issue. I did not change my volume levels. Did you change any of your volume levels?
It wouldn't matter. I have earbuds in.
Well,
my audio isn't being broadcast on a speaker.
Can you still hear it?
Echo. Yes. Yes. Wait, it's a little bit lower. Did you lower the volume? Hello?
Try again.
Hello?
Try again.
Oh wait, I don't hear it now. I don't hear it now. We did it.
Let's get it.
All fixed.
Let's get it.
Okay, so you have no alternate explanation for the presence of helicopters at the scene.
What's that?
You have no alternate explanation for helicopters at the scene.
There's one witness, according to the witness testimonies, who alleged to have seen this helicopter. Beyond that, there is no information surrounding them having like dropped cylinders, which is your principal.
We're not talking about dropped cylinders. We're talking about the helicopters, one plane at a time. And no, it's not one witness. There were many witnesses that corroborated this information. There were people who talked with NGOs and journalistic organizations immediately after the attacks took place. Reporters on the scene.
The original report says that around hour 1900, I just pulled this up, on the same day, a witness reported seeing a helicopter. So that's just one witness. I don't know if you have more.
Yeah.
Your principal claim is that the helicopter was responsible for dropping the chemical cylinders.
I'm just saying there were helicopters there. Again, you keep jumping to the next plane.
Let's just say that. Let's just say I'll agree with you that a witness claimed to have seen a
Multiple
helicopter.
witnesses.
Let's go with that, and let's continue on.
Wait, multiple witnesses, not one witness. There were dozens of them that corroborated that information.
According to the OPCW reports, the original reports.
What was the original report?
What
What was the original report? You mean the draft by Alex Stone, not the original report? Yeah, so you mean the Alex draft report, the one that wasn't published? Okay, the original report, right? So that's because witness testimonies hadn't been completed yet.
I want to hear your evidence for why or how you believe the cylinders were dropped from the helicopter.
Okay, so we're conceding the helicopter point. Okay, gotcha. So there were helicopters. Now we're talking about the chemical, or them dropping like the chemical.
I never said that there weren't. I just said not necessarily. But let's continue.
Okay, so let's try to build this up piece by piece. So do you acknowledge that there were chlorine gas canisters found at locations 2 and 4?
There were cylinders there.
Okay. And do you acknowledge that the cylinders were consistent with the method and the technique that would traditionally be used to deploy a chlorine chemical weapons attack?
What are you alleging is a typical way to deploy a chemical weapons attack? Are you referring to dropping by helicopter?
No, I mean that the canisters themselves were of the appropriate dimensions, contained the appropriate mechanical components to contain highly pressurized chlorine gas. Essentially, these are the types of munitions that will be used to do such a thing. These are also consistent, basically, with the types of designs that have been used in previous chemical weapons attacks in Syria.
So, I don't contest that.
Okay. How do you suspect those arrived there?
The investigation concluded that there was no evidence that a helicopter dropped them, first of all.
But wait, hold on. I request that you use. Please use specific language, not the investigation. The investigation didn't make it claim today. You're talking about the personal report from Ian Henderson, the one that was never published.
The engineering investigation, which
there were other engineering investigations. You're talking specifically about the one that was published by not published even, that was produced by Ian Henderson. Just be specific with the language, okay? There were other engineering reports that disagreed with what he said. You're talking just about Ian Henderson.
The engineering report that was asked to have been by Ian Henderson, yes. That report found that there was a higher probability, I'm quoting this, that both cylinders were manually placed rather than being delivered from aircraft. And then it goes on at location 4, where a cylinder was found on the bed. The study determined that the cylinder was too large to have penetrated the hole in the roof above. At the other site, location 2, the observed damage to the cylinder into the roof it allegedly penetrated were incompatible with an aircraft bombing. Ballistic experts, and this part is not a quote, ballistic experts also said it was more likely that the crater had been made by an explosion, probably an artillery round, a rocket, or a mortar. With both cylinders, the study concluded, I'm quoting again, the alternative hypothesis that the cylinders were manually placed and that the craters were caused by other means produced the only plausible explanation for observations at the scene.
Okay, so a couple of questions then. If this is the case, you do realize Ian Henderson did conclude that there was a chemical weapons attack, or at least that was where he believed the evidence leading. You're the one making the claim that there was no chemical weapons attack, but in doing so, you're citing evidence from an engineering report from a person's conclusion aligned with mine that there was a chemical weapons attack. How do you reconcile that?
Ian Henderson claimed there was a chemical attack.
Have you read this report? He said that
I'm asking you for the information.
Sure, I mean, we can go and read the report if you want. In a second,
you're speaking it like it's fact, so I think
yes, that was his conclusion, yes.
So where did you get that?
From his report.
That there was a chemical weapons attack.
That he said that the evidence led in that direction, yeah. He was under the impression not that there wasn't a chlorine gas attack, but rather that it was placed there. The implication was that Syrian rebels had done so, which is the reason why it wasn't published, because the OPCW is legally disallowed from making any claims as to the agents who are responsible for any alleged chemical weapons attacks. Henderson's documents seem to suggest that it was Syrian funded, and for that reason it wasn't published.
So I don't believe that, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't believe that Ian Anderson claims that there was a chemical attack.
He didn't use language that's strong. They never do. They say, I know that.
But I do know. Well, you continue to claim that he said that without beyond a reasonable doubt.
No, not at any point. Wait, please do not lie about what I said. Okay, I said that he believed the conclusions indicated that, as in the evidence inferred that.
Wait. No, he did not say that. He did not say that. Boss, you're making this stuff up. So again, please, one more time, just so I don't get it wrong here. What did you say? What did you say?
His claim was not that there was no chemical attack, only that the canisters were planted there rather than dropped. His contention was with the deployment of the canisters.
So you didn't know, because a few seconds ago you said that he said that there was a chemical attack, but that.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to be like specific with my language, and it keeps not working because you keep not hearing. Okay, I'm going to be as specific as I can with this language, and this is going to be my wait. Here's my point.
Anderson claimed that there was a chemical attack. That's what you said.
So I'm pretty sure what I said was that the report was principally on the method of the canisters delivery. I believe that the evidence as presented in it did not indicate that Henderson was contesting the existence of a chemical weapons attack. That's the most specific language I can use.
Boss, you're changing your words now. Now you're saying that he didn't contest that there wasn't a chemical attack. A few seconds ago, you said that Ian Anderson did believe there was a chemical attack, but that it was not helicopters who carried out the attack, and that it was likely manually placed. So you're changing your words here. But what I will say is that he did believe that it was likely a manual placement. You're lying about him saying that there was a chemical attack, and if you're not, if you believe you're not lying, I'd like you to cite this, but you can't because you're lying.
I like how you've been weaseling off everything that you said, and me being very slightly more specific with my language, me taken out of context by using tremendous line.
I'm just asking you to cite one thing that you said, and you can't cite it.
You haven't cited anything that you've said. I asked you for citations on a claim about helicopter sources, and you linked me 5 articles. I said, hey, are these really all relevant? And you were like, actually, hold on, wait. And you were like, no, wait, actually, I sent you 200 irrelevant pages.
No, you can type the other 3 links I sent you, because those links.
I haven't had a chance to read them. You didn't give me. You didn't highlight or cite it.
I said, sorry, I sent you the wrong link for the 4th link, but the other 3 are accurate.
You didn't cite anything in there. You just gave me documents. We've been talking. I haven't had time to read them.
Because you said that Ian Anderson claimed that there was a chemical attack, but it was not. It was not carried out by.
I think I've been very specific on my language, and your attempts at obfuscating the situation are indicative of desperation on your part. So Ian Anderson's report did not contest.
Can you cite it?
Ian Henderson's report.
You said that he believed there was a chemical attack.
Can you wait? I repeated this like 20 times now. Are you like deaf? I'm being very clear on this. Can you cite any part of the report where he claims that there was no chemical weapons attack?
Your allegation.
I said very specifically.
Which I'm asking you to cite.
I said very specifically, this document does not speak on the existence of the chemical weapons attack, but it still indicates
it was a chemical attack.
Do you want to read? Wait. So I keep telling you what I said, and you're like, oh, then why did you say this? And then you say I said a thing I didn't say. I've been very clear about what I said. You want to move forward? You're not even arguing against my positions at this point. We can read this together if you want to.
Bro, you literally told me that Ian Anderson believed there was a chemical attack. You didn't say that he didn't contest that there wasn't a chemical attack, or even weigh in on that. You said you believe there was a chemical attack.
This guy's literally like Sharon Fox. Holy fuck.
You can't cite it.
Do you want to read it with me?
I'm still waiting on you for
You're asking me to cite a thing that I don't believe. Why? How long do you want to spend on this?
I'm asking you to cite something that you said a few seconds ago, and it doesn't exist. And now you're asking me to read the report with you.
Have you read it before?
There is no sentence in that report that claims what you just said.
Yeah, because the report wasn't on the chemical weapons attack. The reason why this wasn't published to begin with is because the inference here was that there was some degree of responsibility on the part of the Syrian rebel group for the chemical weapons attack. It was because this document seems to assert that the chemical weapons attack was a part of the Syrian rebellion interference that it didn't get published to begin with. This document is not about there not being a chemical weapons attack. It is only about him talking about the logistics of the delivery of the bomb. Statements which, by the way, were contested later within the OPCW significantly, which is why they weren't included in the final report.
Do you realize that every single member of the fact-finding mission
He's going to keep debating and think that I don't believe that.
Agreed that it was highly unlikely and there was no evidence to suggest that helicopters dropped the cylinders. Every single member except for one.
Do you have evidence of that claim?
It's
also, we weren't even on this yet, man. We weren't even on the whistleblower shit yet. Okay, so is your claim then that the canisters were placed there, like manually? They weren't dropped from helicopters, but helicopters seem to have the location and coincident. You saw the helicopters, but then there just happened to be these canisters there, and it was like a coincidence that those two things happened. And also that there was damage to the buildings, which like correlated with the weight and the size of the canisters being dropped at a high velocity at a high altitude.
What I'm saying is that Ian Anderson believes, according to his own engineering report, that there's a possibility that both cylinders were manually placed rather than being delivered from aircraft.
Did you say possibility?
Higher probability.
Higher probability. Okay, well, it seems like the other engineering reports and the broader OPCW disagree with them, which is why it wasn't included in the final report.
So the other engineering reports that you're flippantly citing here, they have no evidence. They're completely redacted, and they're from anonymous experts, which we haven't been able to see yet. If this whole,
how are they redacted?
Let me finish. If this investigation was taken before the entire scientific advisory board of the OPCW, which is what I want to see happen, right? They could adjudicate this issue by meeting with the dissenting inspectors and all the original team members to weigh their evidence arguments and their claims that they were censored, which you don't believe.
This doesn't have anything to do with the claims being made.
Come to a conclusion as to what happened. But the OPCW executives have denied every single request for this to happen. So
this is more conspiracy. I'm asking you a question. Do you think they were planted there?
It's not. I'm curious if you believe that there should be a scientific advisory board panel led by the SAB into what took place here and the allegations of censorship and doctrine.
So you realize, like, you just completely moved away from what we were talking about to a broader conspiracy about censorship. Let's talk about what we were actually talking about before you pivoted off of it. Do you think that those canisters were just planted there?
I'm alleging exactly what Ian Henderson's investigation found, that there's a higher probability it concluded both cylinders were manually placed.
So you do believe that? You believe that they were planted there?
I'm alleging that there's a higher probability, and the investigation was cut short before they could come to a determination as to what happened. But yes, a lot of the evidence does point in the direction that they were manually placed.
From one guy's report?
From Ian Anderson's report, the one of the international leading experts on ballistics. And,
so wait, you can't keep deferring to authority, and the authorities agree with me. You can't keep doing that. The overwhelming international consensus is in favor of my narrative.
You don't want to reckon with the truth, and the
it's what? Oh my God, dude! You guys really are indistinguishable from Sandy Hook deniers. You don't want to fight against the truth. Like, dude, come on, take your dick out of yourself.
Continue, regardless of whether you like it or not. I guess.
So Henderson made that claim, but then there were other 3 independent engineering studies. Wait,
it's not just.
So wait, hold on. Well, you're referring to Henderson's report, are you not?
I was, and then you allege that it's insufficient because it's only one person.
So the claim that I'm making. So hold on. You can't answer. You haven't answered any of the direct questions. Were cylinders manually planted? Wait, I'm asking you a question about your belief. I'm asking you a question about your belief, so you can't keep weaseling out of your insane conspiracy bullshit by saying that you don't believe this. You can't test the official narrative, but then not provide. Please. you can't contest the official narrative and then not have another reasonable explanation. There has to be another reason why this happened. Why corpses were found with foam in their mouth. Why corpses were found foaming at the mouth. Why, for example, so many people saw helicopters over the city. So now I'm asking you, chlorine gas canisters get at locations 2 and 4? And furthermore, how was there damage done to the buildings consistent with the aerial deployment of these canisters? Did they look around for buildings that looked like they had recently been shelled and then ran up there with an empty chlorine gas canister and then dropped it there and nobody saw this?
It wasn't consistent. The ballistics experts said that it was more likely that the crater, are you going to listen? It was more likely that the
Which ballistic experts?
Explosion, probably from an artillery round, a rocket, or a mortar. With both cylinders, the study concluded.
Which study?
That the cylinders were really inflated, and that the craters were caused by produce the only plausible explanation for observations at
Which study?
That is Ian Henderson's report.
Yeah, stop saying the study and stop saying the ballistic experts. But what you mean is the one guy's completely unverified report. Can you please stop pretending there are more people on your side than actually are by not naming the people we've already directly implicated in the broader conversation? Just say Ian Henderson's report, okay? Now, so how did the cylinders get there?
That is the principal argument that I'm trying to make here.
How did the cylinders?
This investigation was cut short, and the key investigators were forced off the fact-finding mission team before they could complete their investigation.
How
that is the
did the cylinders?
And that's why I want to see this taken before the scientific advisory board, the OPCW, so we can identify and weigh out all the evidence on both sides. And come to a conclusion as to whether there was a cover-up and potentially start another investigation as to who was responsible for this attack.
How did the cylinders get there? They weigh about 180 pounds. They're brought up to 2 locations. One of them had a harness on it that was so large it would be difficult to get through narrow hallways. How did they get up there with no witnesses? Not even witnesses that the Syrian government or the Russian government attested to have seen people planting that stuff.
So Henderson's report was focused specifically on how the cylinders got there, not whether there was a chemical tag or anything like that. So he doesn't purport to know who was responsible for placing them.
I'm asking you how they got there. My narrative is really simple. Why were there people who died with foam in their mouths? Why were these buildings blown out without there being any shrapnel nearby? Why did these people die? Why were there canisters there? Why were there helicopters there? Oh, the helicopters dropped chlorine bombs, something that Assad has done many other times. Your explanation is, I don't know about the corpses, I don't know about the helicopters, I don't know about the canisters, I don't know about anything.
You suggest that aircraft bombing was responsible for those chemical cylinders, the lead chemical cylinders getting there. In addition to that, the cylinders the report produced the only plausible explanation for the observations as reported again. And watch, I haven't even gone to this yet, but I think this is important. This is important. We're reading all of this stuff. You might find this interesting.
And there are 3 independent engineering studies in addition.
He's a journalist at The Intercept.
What does this have to do?
You don't want to hear what The Intercept found?
No, I want to do the question by question instead of jumping around desperately to avoid answering basic questions about my experience.
This is directly related to your claim, so I thought you might want to hear
your claim about the planting of chlorine bomb canisters.
Let's just go into it anyways. James Parkin believes that and this actually relates to the initial point that you made regarding the makeup of the canisters themselves. So in his report, he found that the canister valve was unlikely to have snapped off so neatly without the benefit.
How did they get there? Please, I can't keep doing this. Please, just tell me.
Okay, Bob, if you are so concerned with how they got there,
that's a pretty big question, isn't it?
evidence? What is your no? Because I've highlighted many times that the only public investigation we have into this that hasn't been challenged by the OPCW executives has ruled out the fact that this was brought by a helicopter and that there is the only possibility is that they were manually placed. So I'm curious, what is your smoking gun evidence that these were dropped from a helicopter?
I'm just asking for a basic alternate explanation for how they got there. This is specialty equipment that weighs an enormous amount that would have been incredibly difficult to transport, yet no witnesses saw it happen, and we have videos of people scrambling and like dying right after this hits like the top floor of one of the buildings. There's like a video of people like choking in it. Hold on, you can see the chlorine bomb. You're like, oh wait, hold on, please. Video of like people screaming and dying as like the chlorine bomb is half poking through a portion of the ceiling of the roof that it destroyed. And please God, I'm begging you so hard. Please let me finish this.
I'll bring in Anderson to have that video, Bosh.
Okay, please God.
This entire time, but you haven't shown it to all of us. Yeah, you want to show us the video of the chemical cylinders being dropped?
I can't wait. It's not a video of the chemical cylinders being dropped. It's a video of people panicking after the chlorine gas starts being disseminated into one of the buildings. I can't show it on my screen.
Because you just said
that's what I said.
There was a video of helicopters dropping. And
no, I didn't. Dude, wait. I can't wait. Are you arguing? Is there an echo?
There was a video of items being dropped. So I'll give you one. Wait, said that, but where's that video?
Wait, is there a third person in here? Are you hearing somebody else's claims? Is there a third individual here making claims that I haven't made? You realize all this is being recorded, right? Is there there's a video of the chlorine bomb partially in the building and people freaking out around. I can't show it on my screen because it's TOS. It's not like a secret video. I can link it to you if you want. It's like pretty horrible.
Are you referring to the hospital scene?
No, I'm not. I know you're very like really want to do the white helmets thing, but no, I'm not. I'm talking about in the building.
You mean like I want to talk about the thing that has?
Oh my God, you can't. So wait, so you have no alternate explanation for the placement of the filters. This is the third thing you're saying. You just have no explanation. Is that correct?
I'm saying you're just basically saying that Ian Henderson's report is bogus, right? I mean, what are your claims?
So you can't answer it. You can't answer it, dude. Oh, okay. All right. Let's move to the next one then. We haven't even gotten to the Ian Henderson report. Okay. Okay.
Peer reviewed. It was peer reviewed, and he consulted with expert
peer review or reviewed it.
The members of the fact-finding mission team and independent ballistic missile experts.
Independent ballistic missile experts. Then why did all of the independent engineering investigations afterwards disagree with the Henderson report? That's not what peer review means.
I'd be so curious to find that out, but unfortunately, the OPCW hasn't made any of those investigations public. And the only investigation that has been, you're referring to 3 different investigations by independent experts. None of those have been made public. The only public investigation we have is Ian Anderson's, and it's been peer reviewed. And
that's not what peer review is. Peer review is an academic process. It doesn't mean other people have read this document. That's not what peer review means. Peer review means it's something that happens in academia.
Because you said there was a video showing something being dropped from a helicopter.
No, I did, dude. Wait, are you? I said at the beginning of this conversation that it's either going to be dishonesty or mental illness. I'm leaning towards the latter one right now because this is like schizophrenia. Like, are you hearing shit I'm not saying? Are there other voices? Do they tell you to kill?
And you also can never cite the claim that Ian Anderson believed there was a chemical attack. So wait on that as well.
You need to get these voices checked out, okay? This is some serious shit. You really need to. I really hope they don't tell you to like kill or hurt people, okay? Because this is some really worrying stuff.
I cannot wait to put this all up. You know, if you're
I know because you didn't believe in any of this when you came here.
We didn't help your case. Neither did Patrick Roseman's DMs.
What about Patrick Roseman? You know, it's funny. This doesn't make us feel like does it make you uncomfortable that like I'm feeling like I'm arguing with a Holocaust denier right now? But wait, does that make you wait? You actually want the video of like people dying?
Because you said there's a video from showing a helicopter dropping something.
No, I didn't. I can't prove claims I literally haven't seen. Okay. You can go back and review the VOD if you want. You're free to clip it. That didn't happen. Okay. Please listen to me and not to the voices in your head. That wasn't said.
Cool.
Okay. Do you want the video I was actually referring to? So in this video, like, I can't show it on my screen, but like, there's pretty clearly a gas canister and people freaking out. And like, people plant the gas canister and then got a bunch of crisis actors who later died to like freak out on camera, and then they died with foam in their mouths. Like, here, I'll send you the video. Can you give me an explanation for this? This was uploaded the day of the attack, by the way.
People who died were crisis actors. People
Then
are
can you explain this video?
is alleging that, yes, like you just said, the canister was manually placed, so I'm glad you've been able to understand that now. And you asked who peer-reviewed this. I told you.
Wait, I can't wait. You can't keep doing this conversation if you literally can't answer questions. Wait, so do you believe in crisis actors?
I don't believe that. You said the people who died, I'm alleging, are crisis actors.
I just sent you a video. There are people scrambling and freaking out, and you can see a gas canister. They are acting in the way you'd expect them to if their house just got hit by a chlorine gas canister. Is this video fake? Did somebody run in there, plant the gas canister on the roof, and then get the camera ready and have a bunch of people freak out, and then later people in this video were found as corpses? Is that, like, the thing that happened?
So the white helmets who were running around.
This is not white. No. You're like thinking like, oh, I pivot. This isn't white helmets.
I'm sure the false narrative.
This isn't white helmets. This isn't white helmets. You know, you keep wanting to pivot to that because you have like prepared talking points, but this is not white helmets.
Let's just go point by point here.
Oh my God.
If you believe, and I'm not saying you do, but let's say you believe Ian Anderson's report that what?
Oh, wait. If we're at the point now where you're so obviously aware that you've been blown the fuck out that you will literally not participate in a conversation that we are having, then we might as well just end it here. I've already given you more attention than you deserve. I know you were desperate to get my attention. We're literally at this point now.
Ian Anderson's report said that it's more likely that the crater had been made by an
Okay, I think we're at that point. Alright. Have fun, my dude. Talking to you was identical to talking with the neo-Nazis. There's literally no difference between people. Alright, look. I can't, once we've reached the point where they're literally not participating in a conversation, I like that. I'm like, here's a video immediately as the attack happened, and he's like, are you talking about the white helmets? Because he has like a bunch of talking points prepared about them, you know? He was not engaging in that conversation whatsoever. And by the way, hey, if you guys, anyone who agrees with him or watching this video, and you honestly believe he came up looking good there, you really are ideologically indistinguishable from neo-Nazis, because I have heard more convincing arguments for Holocaust camp deniers, okay? Wow. Like, every point, he's like, well, here's, I don't have an ultimate explanation for why this incredible series of events took place, you know? Wow, you know, I can't explain the helicopters, I can't explain this, I can't explain that, I can't explain any of this, and he kept jumping to excuses to ignore every single point of the conversation, you know? He was like, oh yeah, well, you got your preparation points from the Young Turks guy. Oh, this is the white helmets talking point. Oh, you got this from Bellingham, CIA. Can you go through your evidence, Vosh? I want to hear it so I know what to say to deniers. Do you guys want do you guys want all the evidence? Do you want me to like dump it on you? So that guy was a weaselly little fucking snake, so he wouldn't admit to any of his actual beliefs. But he believes, and a lot of other people like him believe, that it was a false flag attack that the United States and Syrian rebels orchestrated to justify the 2000 missile strikes, which, by the way, caused no Syrian deaths and then ended up killed nobody, and only destroyed facilities of the U.S. military, plane, or chemical weapon facilities, and then chemical weapon attacks stopped afterwards. So that sure was some crazy WMD false flag that they did. They did a false flag to show the Syrian government did something that they already do all the time anyway, in order to cause 3 deathless strikes on facilities. You're still streaming video of Jackson? No, I'm not. Whatever he's doing on his end, there's no longer anything coming from my end. Anyway, oh, dude, that's funny. You know who just DM'd me saying that I just ran away? Memento, the literal neo-Nazi. That's crazy, dude. Well, all bedfellows, you know. It's just a wild, very on the left people, you know. Anyway, glad you're still watching. Anyway, okay, so first of all, the claims that this was a false flag orchestrated by the United States are ridiculous. United States really didn't have anything to gain from it. They didn't make any significant strategic advances in the region. And additionally, the consequences of the chemical weapon attack ended up leading the Syrian rebels to flee from Duma, giving the Assad military forces a hold up in the Syrian civil war. So the United States understood a false flag to achieve essentially nothing, and then also gave a strategic advantage to Assad, and it happened 3 years ago. Later, Assad even bragged that he got off easily after the chemical weapon attack. There's so much stuff that we didn't even have the opportunity to go over. Oh my God. First of all, when the OPCW initially tried to do the investigation of what took place in Duma, the Russian and Syrian military forces blocked them, citing security concerns, except they were never able to provide any evidence of them. Then, when the OPCW was finally able to arrive about a week later, the Russian and Syrian forces suddenly, were not present, and then there was small weapons fire that attacked the OPCW investigators. Security concerns, which forced them away. Somehow, this was done in spite of the fact that Russian and Syrian forces controlled the city. So the rebel forces had already fled. So what security concerns? And also, if it was a U.S. false flag, why the fuck would they be wanting to keep the OPCW investigating the claims that they believe to support the Russians later? The Russian and Syrian governments prevented the OPCW from investigating the site for 2.5 weeks. A little over 2 weeks, I think. Thereabouts, something like that. A long time, okay? So after all of this obfuscation, keep in mind the OPCW was delayed, but other organizations weren't, okay? Other organizations like the New York Times and international humanitarian and anti-war organizations, they were present immediately after the attack, and they were got witness testimonies and found overwhelmingly people arguing that there was a weapons attack, overwhelmingly arguing that that they saw helicopters. Like all of these testimonials that they gave really ended up aligning with the narrative that I used. The only notable instance of a person disagreeing with that narrative was a young boy and his father who claimed that there was no such attack. That person right there apparently were used to a military base, and they were prompted by the Russian military. So here we have one witness who disagrees with the overwhelming amount of witness testimonies, and it's this kid and his father, and we're the Russian military. Okay. Anyway, there are a billion, really little pieces of misinformation that Russia and Syria spread immediately after these attacks. For example, Russia made the claim that the attack didn't actually not happen at all, but instead that there were attacks locally at a Syrian rebel-controlled chemical weapons storage facility that later turned out not to exist. It was like a lie. There was a scramble to assemble a bunch of different narratives. There were people saying that there had never been any chemical weapons attacks, and incidentally, there were also dissident reports coming out from medical experts who were in Damascus and kilometers away, who claimed that the people may have died from dust inhalation, except that's not consistent with any of the medical evidence or any of the evidence of other examples of bombing or shelling effects in city before. So it seemed like a really huge waste of time. You guys, if you're wondering why the Yankees or Asadas are breaking out this even, they're all brothers. Okay? They act identical to all brothers. You ever see them on Twitter? They're completely identical. They're not different in any way. They get along with all writers. There's a reason why partisan girls literally turn to a big contest. Okay? They're all writers. They're authoritarian. They just like it. They like conspiracy. And they like it when people are murdered, are domination at that level. They just enjoy it. Okay? Anyway, so all of that aside, there's so much evidence aligned against every element of this. First and foremost, the Inspector A, the Alex person who published the first draft of the interim report, that person, many of their claims were based off of biochemical analyses of the bodies and of the survivors of the alleged chemical weapons attack. However, the OPCW as early as 2014 claimed they would no longer do biochemical indicators as a suggestion as to whether or not there was any evidence of a chlorine gas attack. The reason being that they're not reliable. In terms of the evidence of there having been a chlorine gas attack, in addition to an overwhelming number of witness testimonies, also the reports of people with bone bubbling in the mouth, people with injuries consistent with chlorine gas, though it could vary tremendously the OPCW certificates and why it's more. Additionally, here's a nice little piece of evidence. So here's one of those cylinders that the Howard we just talked to said that he didn't have the ultimate estimation of the presence of. What we're looking at right here is just 2 months of erosion. Look at this. This is a steel canister. Over here, this is a picture taken right after the bomb was dropped. Over here, 2 months later, it looks like it was fished out of the ocean after 100 years of a lot of gas. What causes that? Well, chlorine gas causes that. Chlorine gas causes metal to erode and rust. Chlorine gas, when contact with moisture, produces a number of acidic substances that erode metal, flesh, a lot of other things. Additionally, the OPCW reports they were allowed into because Syrian forces didn't actually allow OPCW investigators to one of the locations. That's why people talk about locations 2 and 4. They didn't actually let them there. Syrian forces were like, oh yeah, you can't come into this location, the doors are locked. That's not a joke. The Syrian military said that. That's not a joke. Anyway, there's no other explanation for this degree of erosion. Like, seriously, this is not something that happens naturally. This is about 2 months of erosion. This is insane. And it's consistent with exposure to chlorine gas. Despite the fact that like painting it will make it take much longer to erode, but it happens anyway. Additionally, other metal at the scene was eroded. Lamps, doorknobs, the little metal bits that hold up lights. Corrosion, not erosion. Corrosion, not erosion. There was evidence at the scene of substantial corrosion of metal in the area, and there were also chemical residues left on wood in the area that were consistent with the chemical reactions that would take place after exposure to chlorine gas. Additionally, one of the counter arguments made by people like Bucket head on is that the reason why these trace amounts of chlorine and the chemical byproducts of chlorine were present in the area is because they were produced by bleach cleaning solutions. On walls, roofs, rubble, infrastructure, piping, scaffolding, very good. Also, there were types of erosion that could not take place as a product of bleach. Guys, please don't do this. Alright, please don't do this. Sorry. So here's what we have so far. Okay, we have overwhelming witness reports indicating that helicopters arrived at the scene and that a gas attack took place. Corpses found with symptoms comparable to those of severe chlorine gas exposure. Additionally, the only counter argument to the suggestion that the explosives died of chlorine gas poisoning was from the minutes of a toxicology interview, which were never published because they were preliminary and didn't have full information on the presence of the corpses. The report from the toxicologist was done with the assumption that people would leave the area. However, the actual facts of that body were basically perfectly orchestrated to maximize the death and the casualties in people with no weapons. Again, keep in mind, chlorine gas is heavier than air. The room the guys were talking have seen people with some kind of home. Needs nothing. Chlorine gas doesn't go up. It goes down. It doesn't go up. It goes down. It hit the roof, and the corpses were on the lower level. Additionally, there are videos on the scene of people freaking out, dying. You can see losing their shit because there's a chlorine gas canister right there. Additionally, here's another main piece of evidence. Now, the 10 piece are going to get super triggered because this is Melon Catholic. I'm only showing it on Melon Catholic because the alternative would be to show it in a very, very graphic video that I can't show on Twitch because it shows a lot of bad stuff. So I want to show you 2 photos right here. I'm just taking a photo of Melon Catholic that this is verifiable. Here are 2 pictures right there. Are you looking at it? These are 2 pictures of the chlorine gas canister. This is the one that didn't break all the way through the roof. This is the one that got lodged partially in the building. The one on the left is a frame from a video taken while people was dying. The one on the right was taken by investigators on the rubble, or the rust, my apologies. Now, what do you notice about the one on the left? Is there anything odd about the coloration? Can you see? It's white. Now tell me, did you see any light images that we were looking at previously? It's a yellow panther. Why is it white? Well, in this video that was taken, this bond only just been frost. You know why it's white? This is frost. This is a process called auto-refrigeration. When highly pressurized gases quickly release from a contained area, container and the surrounding environment cools down and goes during a reaction. Have you ever had one of those little spray cans, the ones that spray air on before you heat up? Notice that they get really, really cold, super, super quick. That's called auto-refrigeration. The whole time to understand the entirety of the chemical reaction. It has to do with the pressure inside and stuff like that. So here's a question. Since this frame on the left was taken in a quick frame of a video that was taken right as the box hit, while people freaking out, this was a false flag. Did they spray frost on this canister just so that it could be shown for a couple frames in a video of people dying? This is only visible for like a fraction of a second. Were the false flaggers so fastidious and dedicated that they somehow adhered frost with some other kind of white congealing to the underside right here, specifically so that it can be seen in a shaky phone video for a quarter of a second, and then later somehow remove it? How would they do that exactly? Did they like knock a hole in this donut, prop it up there, and then like spray cold on it, and then like what? The evidence here is very consistent with the rapid depressurization of the interior of this canister. Anything else requiring believably confined to a certain temperature. That's the reason why the diode is often used in power and it has to be an alternate explanation. If you're arguing with a conspiracy theorist, you need to ask them, what is the other explanation? Because here's the thing, guys. History is rough, and we don't have perfect information on anything happening anywhere, let alone in public Syria. Like, we never have perfect data. There will always be gaps in the area, in any area. This is the case for the Holocaust, too. In spite of the literally the details well understood and recorded historical event, arguably the wall of history. We can't know everything. It's a god of the gap zone. That's why we have historians, analysts, and experts. We can't ever know everything, but we can fill in pieces and people who really understand what it means. So, if you're going to challenge the standard narrative, this narrative, the one that the U.S., not the U.S. government, that Assad dropped the chemical weapons here, is a very, very well corroborated, well agreed upon, well understood one. And the only reason it's contested is because Syria and Russia both like moved down in line, so it didn't happen. They had a bunch of like information, and pawns of the Russian government like raised this, all with equal rights. So the only reason this is propagated is because they were essentially looking to get propagated. Like that's it. It's not because there's actually some like super serious, like major, like lack of credibility on the issue of this investigation. Why did Russia lie? They want to support the Syrian government because they feel good with the Anyway, it's very important to ask about involvement because otherwise, like anyone can careful with anything. But anyone can careful with anything. Well, this one historian said that in 1443, a print manifest in Nazi Germany was inconsistent with the broader narrative that there was a payload of food and supplies that was delivered from Munich over here. Anyway, yeah, like this one guy's pretty credible, and he says that didn't happen, And then you're like, okay, so what did you say? And they're like, did I say 1443 to 1943? Whatever, 1443 is anyway, 1943. And then you're like, okay, does that matter? And they're like, well, I don't know, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? Anyway, like, you disagree with me, and you're like, the Jewish show. Wait, hold on. No, wait. Are you alleging that there are inconsistencies in the narrative, or are you alleging that anyone who disagrees with you is like a member of the U.S. State Department? That's the thing that I have with these guys. If they literally just had like a couple questions about the specifics of this event that I would have a huge issue with it, but they don't. He was like being considerate with me. This is the I'm just asking questions thing the Holocaust deniers do. But on their own, they make very strong points. Ever notice this? The Holocaust deniers, in their forums, they're like, yeah, bro, Holocaust never happened. You expect all of it, which it did happen. Nope. But when they're talking with other people, they're like, no, I don't believe in that. I just have some questions on this before. Look at this photo of the door. Does this really look like a door to hold people in gas? Just like a photo of the door. This is what I mean. It's the constant back and forth, very severe and very difficult times. And this once is the one day. Anyway, maybe I have to talk about how many people are Alan Bosch's position on this. Howard Walensky, Glenn Greenwald, the Gray Zone, and Ante, and that's what we call the Values and types like that. I just saw this text. Unfortunately, Howard Walensky's in line with that, but Jimmy Dorsey, that's what social communities working so hard. Oh, yeah, I bet. I hope that guy enjoys the gigantic boost in his career that he gets from like being able to talk to him, you know? Yeah. Wait, I'm actually getting apparently like at some point he started like tampering with his video or something like that. Apparently he like delayed the video like after I left or something. I wonder if he did that echo on purpose. I have no idea. I think anyway, oh, yeah. So basically, the idea that there was some kind of false flag in this situation is just completely impossible. Like, so we make all the witness testimonies. We somehow like planted corpses there with nobody noticing. We make video footage. We make the helicopter presence. We make damages. We make everything. Everything is fake. There's no proof of anything. The only proof is like one independent investigator disagreed with the CW, and like that's it. It's really really bad. So what was the conversation? The funny thing is that with regards to the conversation, like it's not even one book. The U.S. government already achieved its goals in regards to legal set of laws. And they didn't do it before. Now they're I would be really interested in providing for society nonsense. In large part because, hey, I really do think we like to collect the number of Holocaust deniers. Keep in mind, there are people who are going to say that I hate for that today. I only think so. It's made it incredibly clear. He wasn't even talking. You notice that, right? He wasn't even talking. What's the point of having a conversation like that? What? This is one of the tactics that all writers like to use as well. When they realize they're losing it, they act so insufferably that you no longer see any point to talk with them, and they act like you walked away some kind of loss. The fact that I like mentioned the video that took place at the site, and then he was like, you claimed there was a video of the bomb being dropped on the building, when I literally never said that. Did I ever say that? I'm really confident that I never said that. I do not think I ever said that. But he was like so insistent that I said that. And then he kept trying to go to the White House because he had his dinner coming. Another like indication of that guy's dishonesty is like the fact that he kept saying engineering experts or ballistics experts said this or that. He kept referring to the same guy. He's talking about the same guy every time. One guy, you know what I mean? Like he was so clearly trying to inflate the number of people who agree with his perspective by not actually mentioning the specific. And he didn't know what to do. And he said elected that for the basic representation. No, I knew it was something like that. Why do you guys think I stayed up so late like looking up arguments last night? CRCD was so incredibly exhausting. Like it's always going to be like that. They're basically just neonazis. In terms of the way they do it, the world is related to our system. That's basically what they are. That's basically what they do. That's another thing that they did like crazy. This is, by the way, this is something that I'm a little bit proud of. I have disagreed with women. You know what happens with my disagree with you guys go in there and you're like, Bosch bad. When other people have disagreed with you, they're like, you're a fat fucking pedophile, Bosch, you fucking piece of shit, you fucking shit. That's normally what I think, okay? They really act like already. I'm happy though that all of these types were watching because I want to experience okay. That guy couldn't answer a single fucking thing. He was repeatedly caught out on lies and misinformation, and he had no alternate explanation for anything that he was saying. He was also walking back earlier times. He was saying to you, like, I just want you to do this kid. He was so anti-American and stuff like that. He worshipped the population. Yeah, peer review is when you have people who look at it. And he's saying, like, no, I like you guys. I don't like the echo itself. So this is what I mean about broken brains, okay? When I said that there was an echo on mine, he said I was fake. I'm live streaming. There's a huge audience of people watching. How can I possibly get away? Your fans are watching it too. How can I get away with faking it? But that's like committing towards conspiracy. He doesn't actually believe anything. He'll just blow out any kind of argument that he can think of about it. Conspiracy theories often don't actually believe that. I like doing the conspiracy stuff. Watching it, there's one specific yeah, I guess. I'm sorry. I get a little ableist when talking to people like that, but this is something that I've always struggled with. I'm not the best at understanding mindsets. I don't know if you know, but when people are that far gone, I genuinely don't know what to do other than it's all I can really do with people like that. But I know it's ableist. It's just like, I don't even know. But does anyone have an alternate explanation? I think I've never imagined being like that. I don't know. I place a lot of value on like the belief that I'm not crazy after a while. Like I know that I have a bias. I don't think that I'm so unbelievably lost that I could never even that I could let people even have a conversation with them. Yeah, but it is deliberate. That's very important. Nobody acts like that.